Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, idjester. Welcome back to the Advanced Squad Leader rule set in about 15 minutes. We're on part 15, and we're up for the big finale here. This is it. This is going to be the last episode here on defensive fire. And finally, we're learning about final fire, which is Section A of the rulebook, subsection 8.4. That portion of defensive fire, which occurs during the defensive fire phase, is called final fire. Of course, final fire should not be mixed up with final protective fire. I'm not sure why they named everything kind of very similar, but just have to remember that final fire is different because it happens only in the defensive fire phase. During final fire, any of the defenders, units, or weapons that are not marked with a first, a final, intensive, or no fire counter may fire. Any such unit or weapons that are marked with a first fire counter may also fire again, but as area fire and only at targets that are adjacent or in the same hex. A unit or weapon already marked with a final fire counter cannot fire during final fire. Try saying that 12 times fast. Final fire affects all applicable units in a target location, not just those that are moved. But, of course, the penalty for this is you won't get any of the modifiers for the FFNAM or the FFMO. And then, of course, Rule 8.41, when we're talking about multiple rate of fire weapons, any multiple rate of fire weapon which is not marked with a first, final, intensive, or no fire counter, even though it may have fired during the first fire, is still entitled to multiple attacks possibilities during a final fire and at any target, not just adjacent ones. So how can a target fire and not be marked with the first, final, intensive, or no fire counter? Basically what had happened there is it had fired, but it had kept his rate of multiple rate of fire weapon had succeeded. So it might have fired, but it's not going to be marked because it kept it multiple rate. He had kept his multiple rate of weapon, and so he might have fired it but never been marked. So that's how that could possibly happen. Any weapon marked with a first fire counter and capable of intensive fire or sustained fire may use such for one additional attack during final fire, but only against adjacent or same target hexes. So again, a lot of words there, but pretty much easy to explain here when we get down to it. Basically, there's three different things. If you're not marked at all, you don't have any mark, a first, a final, intensive, or any counter on you, you can fire. You shoot anybody you want, as long as, you know, normal attack and line of sight and everything, and range restrictions apply. So if you're not marked, you can shoot at anybody you want. If you're marked with the first fire counter, meaning you've fired once during the defensive fire phase, but you only have a first fire counter, not a final fire counter, you can fire again, but you can only do it at adjacent units. And lastly, if you're marked with the final fire counter, you can't fire again. You're done. You're over. You have no final fire. It's it. So let's look at the different possibilities here in our little example here. First of all, the first thing we're going to do here is we're at the end of the movement phase, so we're now going to go on to the defensive fire phase. So we're going to rotate this phase disc over to the defensive fire section. And when we do that, you notice that we're now in a new color here, the pink color. So the green are done. Greens are over, so we're going to remove all the green counters. So that happens to be all of our residual firepower. Remember, these are only going to stay during your opponent's movement phase, so we can get rid of any of the residual firepower counters, which we will do, including, not the whole stack, please. Just this one, thank you. Let's just make sure what we have going on here Good, good, good. Everything looks good there. Alright, so now we're on to the defensive fire phase. So if we look at the German units, if we look at the Russian units, we can quickly see, because the counters stay, we have a first fire counter, we have a final, we have a final, we have no counter, we have a DM, so he can't do anything. We have a first fire counter. Alright, so it gives us a couple good examples here for our rules. First things first, this unit's not marked with anything, so it can fire at anybody it wants. He can choose to shoot up here if there's line of sight. He can shoot this hex over here, and this hex says there's no restrictions, even if there was a unit adjacent to him. Let's say that this unit here ended up here. Doesn't matter, this guy can shoot at anyone he wants. No restrictions whatsoever. Okay? So because he's got no counter whatsoever. This counter down here in K7, he's marked with a final fire counter. Final fire counter. He's done. He can't do anything. He can't shoot this guy that's adjacent. He can't shoot this guy. He's done. No defensive fire for him because he's got a final fire counter. Same thing with this unit down here. Both of these units have final fired. They're done. Even though they got adjacent units, they can't fire again. This unit here has got a first fire counter. First fire counter, he can choose to shoot again in the defensive fire phase, but only against adjacent units. So obviously he could then shoot this unit right here in the defensive fire phase. If there was multiple adjacent units, he could choose which unit to attack, and even though it is a multiple rate of fire weapon, he is only going to receive one additional attack. So may use such for one additional attack during final fire, only versus adjacent units. So this unit here is marked with the first fire counter. He can choose to shoot his heavy machine gun. Of course, it's going to be sustained fire. So he's going to have the penalty for associated with sustained fire, which we covered in a previous episode. Basically, your break number here on this counter here, since there is no break number, it's assumed to be a 12. It's going to be lowered by 2 points, and the break number turns into a B number, turns into an X. So if he was to roll a 10, 11, or 12, this heavy machine gun would X. It would break. Or it would be X. It would be removed. It would be removed, not B. It would be X'd. So X is removed, B is break. So you can see quite a bit of a chance by taking a second attack on your enemies here with sustained fire. This unit here is a first fire. So he could fire again during this phase, but again only against adjacent enemies. There are no adjacent enemies, so he's not going to be able to do any kind of attack. Same thing with the squad in that hex. He's also first fired. So he will not be able to do any attacks against any other units whatsoever either. Alright, so let's just assume it's the Russian player's defensive fire phase. He decides to take this unit here, and he decides to shoot this unit in K6. Reasons you might want to not take your defensive fire is because sometimes you're waiting for a better opportunity to come along during your opponent's movement phase. There was lots of opportunities for this guy to shoot, and he just decided not to because he was waiting for a better opportunity, and then maybe those opportunities never come along, so your unit's never been marked with defensive fire. So when the defensive fire phase comes, then you get to pick your targets. Other things you might want to do is keep some units that don't fire during your opponent's movement phase, just so you can pick off any stragglers that may be laying around after the movement phase. As you can see here, lots of units become broken during the movement phase because they're usually out in the open and they're getting attacked at by multiple different sides and different attacks. So at that point, if you have units in the defensive fire phase, they can kind of do some extra damage to these units that maybe your opponent wasn't planning on. So we have a little half squad here that was broken, and it looks like a full squad over here that was broken, and we have this other full squad that's out here. We know that this full squad is going to try and make it into this hex. So lots of different opportunities because we never had used this unit in the movement phase. So now it's his turn to say, okay, well, who do I want to shoot at? Who do I want to take advantage of? Where's my worst situation? And probably the worst situation for obviously the Russian players down here in the southern end as opposed to the northern flank. So he'd probably take a shot down here at one of these units. In fact, he might even take a shot at this hex here because it affects, remember, it affects all units in the hex, not just units that are moved. I'm sure we read that here somewhere. Yeah, final fire affects all targets in the target location, not just those that are moved, which is different than your defensive fire. Defensive fire will attack just those units that are moving at the time that you do your attack. So that's another reason why you might want to hold back on a couple units, is because you can get into situations where multiple units, defensive units, are now in the same hex, and instead of attacking just one of them, you can now attack both of them. Unfortunately for the Russian player, he only has a range of 2, and this hex is 3 hexes away, so he'd be at half firepower for this attack. But it might be worth it for him to try to do that, to see if he can damage or try to break this full squad here, because he knows the full squad is going to end up going into this hex. And not only that, what's coming up next is the advanced fire phase. So any German units that have moved are then going to be able to fire in the advanced fire phase. So if he was able to break them, this unit, ahead of time, he wouldn't get his advanced fire phase. So we're just going to assume the Russian player go ahead and take this opportunity. Normally he might take a shot at this one, but because this guy still has an attack, because he's only been marked with first fire, and he can only attack adjacent units, this unit can only attack this one, so there's no sense in him attacking him as well. He might as well attack this guy. Of course, he's going to lose half his firepower. Half his firepower is going to be 3 firepower. There is no 3 firepower column, so we're going to round it down to 2 firepower. There is no other modifier, so he is going to take a shot at this J6. And let's see if he can do any damage on the 2 table. He's been rolling really, really well. And this, fortunately for him, he rolls a 10 this time. On the 2 column, a 10 column is nothing. So the attack does nothing. He is then marked with a final fire counter. He is, oops, right there. He is done with his attack. There's no residual left whatsoever in the defensive fire phase, so you don't have to worry about leaving residual. That's not one of the benefits of the attacks in the defensive fire phase. And 9 times out of 10, most of your units are going to be spent in your opponent's movement phase. And like I said, you might keep a couple of them back to see if you can get better opportunities. Those opportunities never come up, so you don't really get an attack, and then finally you do. And like I said, you might want to keep a couple of them just available to take these opportunities where you got shots against multiple units or against units that are going to cause you problems or damage. So he's marked with the final fire counter. This guy is marked with the first fire counter. He's got nobody to attack. So what we like to do is just, whoop, that's not what we like to do. There we go. Flip that over to final fire so we know this guy's done, that guy's done, that guy's done. This guy, he's going to take his final fire attack against this adjacent unit. And even though it's broken, Broken unit that fails its morale check again becomes casualty reduced, so he might be able to take care of that half squad altogether. So we have 6 firepower there. We'll go ahead and use the squad as well. So we have nope. The little half squad cannot fire if he's going to fire the little machine gun. Because of our squads, half squads can fire a. If you watch the squad's video, half squad can fire 1 support weapon and lose its inherent firepower, which is obviously a lot better than using its own attack. So we got a 6 firepower, which is going to be halved firepower because it is considered area firepower. Well, I know I read this somewhere. Where is it? Oh, right here. In the big green. But only as area fire and only at units in an adjacent location there. If you're marked with the first fire counter. Right, so we're moving on. So half firepower, half of 6 is 3. Remember, you don't round down yet. You only round down at the end. And you keep all your fractions. So 3 firepower, but he is adjacent, so it's going to be double. Double 3 is 6. So 6 firepower attack. He gets a -1 for the leader. There is no FFMO, FFNAM, so it's just going to be a -1 on the 6 column. And hopefully he doesn't roll too high and break his machine gun. He rolls an 8. 8 -1 because the leader is a 7. 7 on the 6 column is a normal morale check, so he's going to force this broken unit to make his morale check to see whether or not it is going to break and run, or if the unit's just going to disband and everybody dies. Remember, this DM +4 to his morale check does not apply. That only applies to a rally. So his morale is a 7. So he needs to resist his normal, with a normal morale check, 6 on the 6. It was a 7 on the 6, was it not? Because he rolled an 8, -1 is 7. Yes, 7 on the 6 column is a normal morale check. Just want to verify that. A normal morale check for that unit. German rolls a 6. 6 is less than 7, so he does make his morale check. This unit here, even if it would have kept his rate of fire, in this case the 6 was the colored dice, so he would have kept rate of fire. But in this case, he only gets 1 attack anyway, so would not have received an additional attack. He can be flipped over to final fire. Oop, go down. Thank you. So we got a final. This guy is broken. This guy we're not going to assume is going to shoot anybody because he wants to keep his concealment for the time. And there you go. That's it. Defensive fire phase is over. The defender declares all his attacks have been completed, and we are done with the defensive fire phase. So that's a look. I know it took us a few episodes. We wanted to go a little slow. We wanted to use a couple of the different rules and show you how things are going to play out. Now that the defensive fire phase is over, we're going to go on to the next phase, which is the advanced fire phase. When this happens, of course, all the purple markers can come off, so it's easier for your opponent to see exactly who's out there, so you don't have these counters covering them up, because now it's his opportunity to attack with anybody that is moved can now attack and is not broken. So this unit here in J6, this full squad, can now take his attack against the defending units. This unit over here can take his attack. This unit here can take his attack. The pinned unit can take his attack, although it's going to be half firepower. Remember, all of these attacks are going to be half firepower because it's an advanced fire phase. and those units that are pinned are going to be half firepower again. So, for example, this unit here in J8 is a 4 attack. It's halved because of the advanced fire phase, so it's going to be a 2, and it's going to be halved once again because he's pinned, so he's going to only have a 1 firepower attack against this unit. It is going to be doubled because it's a point blank fire, so he would be back up to the 2 column, and of course the defender would get any kind of terrain bonuses that would be associated with that. So that's a look at one of the most important aspects of Advanced Squad Leader. Between the movement and defensive fire phase and the advanced fire phase, these 3 phases are kind of the 3 phases that are the most intricate part of Advanced Squad Leader. I find that the movement phase and defensive fire phase is pretty much a balance of using your forces and figuring out what your opponent's going to do, and that is one of the most important aspects of Advanced Squad Leader. And understanding how to play the best of your ability is understanding how all of that works. The second most important thing is the route and rallying aspect of Advanced Squad Leader, and understanding how that those two combine those two together. It is probably the most important 2 rules or understanding. If you got a pretty good understanding of the movement / defensive fire phase, what we just went through in this, if you got a pretty good understanding of this phase and all the rules associated with that, and now if you also have a pretty good understanding of the routing and rallying aspect of Advanced Squad Leader, you're well on your way. You're well on your way to learning it and understanding the complexities of an Advanced Squad Leader, because those are the biggest 2 rules that are associated with defensive fire and routing and rallying. There's many different rules associated with those, and those are kind of the important things. But understanding the philosophy behind those and understanding how they flow and play together, those are the biggies. If you can understand those, you're well on your way to learn an Advanced Squad Leader, and hopefully I'm doing a pretty good job of explaining all this for you. So time is run up, and we're way over again. Sorry. But wanted to finish up our defensive fire phase. I also wanted to just introduce the advanced fire phase, basically just to let you know what happens in that phase. And I think we covered that in another section, but all the units that are moved can now fire, and the rules associated with that advanced fire phase, you just at half firepower when you fire, and then all the other rules apply. So if you're adjacent, it's going to be doubled. If you're at long range, it's going to be halved again. So, and then of course, don't forget your medium machine guns and your heavy machine guns don't get to fire in the advanced fire phase. So you have to remember little rules like that are associated with the Advanced Squad Leader system. So we're done with the movement phase, defensive fire phase, and we're going to move on to the next section of the rule book in the upcoming videos. So watch for that to come shortly. Thanks so much for all your support out there, and we'll see you next time.